It's Tuesday, June 20th, and we're at just about almost 11 a.m. And we haven't been able to do a stream for almost a week now, or I think about a week. So I apologize for that. Just hope to try to get back on some kind of consistent schedule. It's also been difficult with our internet providers been in and out of service the past 3 days. Yesterday was tough. There was like no reception, but still was taking holiday off. So gladly didn't um, affect me here. But just in case, heads up for today's stream, it's possible that it cuts out again and there's an issue. And if that happens, we'll see how much we get through it. So anyway, we're continuing on with this book here, Redeeming Power: Understanding Authority and Abuse in the Church by Dr. Langberg. And the next chapter is also the first chapter of part two, where she labels it or titles it Power Abused. And this chapter specifically is titled Understanding Abuse of Power. Now, the material in this chapter is similar to material going back to chapter one. In chapter one, she talked about the sources and purpose of power. Now, in that chapter, she focused more on where we derive power, like where we get power from. And if you remember that session or didn't watch it, just as a reminder, the source of our power as human beings coming from a Judeo-Christian perspective, where we use the scriptures known as the Bible, comprise of what's called the Old Testament, New Testament, is if we use that as our source, what we understand then about human beings is unique from other faiths and other religions and other systems of beliefs, right? So according to this perspective, to the Judeo-Christian perspective, uh, and to be fair, Jewish people may not totally agree with this perspective. So it's a Christian perspective. The source of our power is from God Himself. Human beings are considered to be a special creation, something beings put together by God in a different way than other beings were created, and or other life forms. And what makes us unique is that when God made us, it shares our purpose in the Scripture in the Book of Genesis that He made us to reflect His image and likeness on this earth, right? And then He breathed His life into us, and so by creating us in this special, unique way, we were endowed with power in different forms. Okay. And so that's the source of the power that we get. That's what Dr. Langberg goes through in chapter one. And as we looked at the very first session of of this particular series on abuse in the church, we looked at that more in depth then also. Now, in that chapter, she did briefly mention the types of power we have. And in this chapter here, in chapter five, Understanding Abuse of Power, she goes into more detail about the different types of power that humans have and how we can use those to either bless or abuse others, right? So she starts the chapter off by talking about relationship, okay? And the fact that abuse in the human sphere, whether it's systemic or one on one, it shows itself in relationships and how we have relationships with each other. Okay, and so she starts off by giving some definitions of of abuse and of relationships. But what I really liked about what she did here was she broke down the definition of a relationship, and she concludes that a relationship is a story. Okay, we relate to others and we're co-writing a story, weaving our lives together to tell a story. So we think about and she gives this anecdote here in this book, and I think I'll borrow it. She said, think about you having your relationships with your neighbors, right? And let's say it's good. I know not everybody has good relationships with the neighbors. We have decent ones. We're not familiar with everybody, but everybody that we know, we have good relationships with them. We have no animosity, no anger, no hatred. We don't have any problems with anybody in that kind of sense. Okay. And so I'll just use that like it's like we're going on with that. That's our story. Like I go outside, that's our relationship. I go outside, I see my one neighbor and his wife, and we say hi, we talk for a little bit, find out how each other's doing, share details, history, past stories. It's always they're older than we are. They've been living here longer, so they've got more experience, and they like to recount those things. And I enjoy hearing them, and then we just that's in and out. They're like at some point like, oh, I got to go inside, I got to do this, or taking trash out. Oh, we talk about that. Oh, look at the rain. We have like this relationship with each other. And my neighbors to the left would say hi, how you doing? Occasionally we talk, show plants. Like I'm growing the time. Things like that. The neighbors across the street, you're waving and hi, how are you? Good. Shorter communications, but that's there. And it's meaningful because we see each other and we don't see each other. We were gone for India for a while. That part of our relationship, our story disappeared. Remember, we got back and he was across the street. The guy was like, "Hey, where were you guys? We were gone for 6 weeks." We're like, "Oh, we went to India," and we just because we don't have like that depth of relationship, we didn't really share with him where we were going, uh, like the other neighbors. But then he's like, "Oh, but he was missing that, right? It was part of the story." And so that's relationships. Now, where things can get crazy, it's like let's say one of them, let's say the one that's to the right of me, the elderly couple, they let's say they move out, right, and someone else moves in, and I kind of expect the story to stay the same as a human being. Like we get into these patterns, and we have expectations about the story, about how the relationship's going to play out. And so we're thinking it's going to be the same way. One of the big things we have each other is mutual respect for each other and our properties and how we care for each other and help each other. There's been a number of times where I'm like, leave out of town. I'm like, oh, shoot, recycling was this week. If we don't get it out, then it's going to just stay packed for the next 2 weeks. And so I'll text them, hey, can you put my recycling out? And they're good with that. It's a relationship that we have. It's a story we share with each other. Let's say a new neighbor comes out. I got their information. I text them, hey, same thing. I forgot to put out my recycling. Can you please put it out? The response, no. I'm too busy for that. You should have done it yourself. I can't be bothered. Whatever. Like whatever the response is, to say it's a no. All of a sudden, I'm like, oh, okay. Um, it hits you the realization that your relationship's going to be different. And where Dr. Langford takes this is to where it can become uh, abusive, where let's say the neighbors are throwing trash. She gets pretty extreme. She's like, let's say the neighbors are throwing their trash on your lawn. They leave junk and cars and bicycles laying around. You try to speak to them, they get angry. You bring in other neighbors, and neighbors tell you to be quiet. Just stop complaining. Don't make it worse. And you go to the authorities. There's nothing they can do because it's just a civil thing. Then your neighbors complain that you're harassing them, and now you're living a completely different story. You go from like this peaceful neighborhood, good neighbors, friends, to someone who's mistreated, exploited, and literally trash. She says it affects your home, your marriage, your appearance, your mood, and your status. And this is a small but concrete picture of what happens when abuse of any kind is brought into a relationship. Okay, all of a sudden you go now. One thing I want to add, I want to add to this. So she's talking about the perspective of you go from like something that's healthy, something that's good, to all of a sudden you're being mistreated, you're being exploited, you're being trashed by a new relationship, right? And it's just like you tell people about it, they don't believe you, or others say there's nothing we can really do about it. You don't get a lot of help from anybody else, and that's what it's like to be in an abusive relationship. For those who come from happy, healthy, good relationships into those relationships. Now, some of us are raised in abusive relationships, are raised where you're constantly mistreated, you're trashed, you're junked, you're exploited, you're told by other people there's nothing we can do to help you, you're kind of on your own, that kind of thing. That was the home we grew up in. We meaning my siblings and I, and my mom, and just with my dad and the way that he was. So we were mistreated a lot. And so what's awesome, I thank God for, is coming out of that, deciding like I don't want to have that same kind of thing happen. I don't want my daughter to have the same kind of relationship in her home with her parents where she's mistreated, or with her father especially. She's mistreated, she's exploited, so on and so forth, right? Um and so you would think though that someone who came out of a relationship, a story that was abusive, would often do that. that meaning they look at their future relationships and decide, I don't want this to be the same thing, and to purposely make a situation where the relationship's healthy. You would think that would be automatic, but it's not. Unfortunately, a lot of people actually end up falling into similar patterns, similar stories, because again, like I said earlier, we're used to the stories that we tell, and the stories that we've experienced, and the experiences that we have. It's why, like, they just opened up a Publix. This Publix that was here for years and years and years. It got demolished, was closed for a year. They just reopened it. I walked in there real quick, and I just stood there. I didn't know where. I just wanted to get some hot dog buns, and I was like, where do I go? My relationship, my story with that store is now gone, right? I mean, it's changed forever. I can't get it back. Not going to find a store like that. And someone finally looked at me and said, someone who worked there said, "What are you looking for?" And tell me where it is. And I was like, okay. And I went over there, and I recognized the layout from like other stores. Like, oh, so this is going to be different, right? And you would think that again we would break the pattern, but no, we're just so used to patterns sometimes. And even in my life, I didn't realize it until like revelation, God speaking, people telling, whatever. But there were other relationships I was in that were abusive. Church relationships, professional relationships. I remember I got a job in '08. I finally got a job after months and months of trying. It was one of the worst times in the economy in 2008. I got a job working at Publix, which I had previous experience at. They put me in the produce section. I didn't have any experience there. And while I was there was an employee, there's a coworker, right? I'm getting used to it. I'm learning, and he just kept he felt like it was his need to tell me that I needed to lose weight. Every time he saw me, he's like, "You're a big boy. You need to lose weight. You'd be look good, better looking if you just lost like 50 pounds." And he would just always have these cutting remarks. And at first, I was just like, "Oh, whatever." It's kind of funny. I thought it was kind of funny, like it just kind of making fun of each other. Just like, "Oh yeah, what about you?" And I would say things about his head, because he had um, like these big folds in the scalp of his head or whatever. But eventually, it just got to be so much from him that I just couldn't. I didn't want to hear it anymore, and I just one day just didn't go back to work. And they never called me. They were just like, I guess it didn't matter. I don't know what was going on with the managers there, but I just didn't go back. And I realized later I was, being verbally abused at that job, and it made me feel so terrible that I got depressed, and I just want to go back to work. And I always think back on that. And I'm like, man, I I should have done more or whatever. But when you're in those situations, the relationships weave together, they're abusive. If you don't know that it's not supposed to be that way, you're going to tend to blame yourself because you feel like that's your part of the story. That's your part of the relationship. And that's not the way it's supposed to work. And that's really not how it's supposed to be. And now I have a little more recognition and stuff as I get older, but I'm not perfect. I still fall into some of those traps sometimes. Now, in this chapter, I wanted to just point out, and again, I talked about this before, the different types of power that we have as human beings, and then how those types of power then weaved into our stories, and they can be abusive. We can use those types of power abusively in our story. So the first story, or the first type of power that Dr. Langberg talks about is physical power. Straight up can be about the size of a person. He talks about as a person that's like 250 pounds. I would say 300 pounds, muscular, over 6 feet tall, 6.5 feet tall. Someone who's just so intimidating physically, has physical power, right? And if that person is a physically abusive person, or they're just an abusive person in general, and they're in a relationship with somebody, and their wife is talking, and their wife kind of says something, and people laugh awkwardly, and the husband kind of taps her on the elbow. We may not notice what that means, or that even happens, but in their story, that little tap on the elbow can mean something significant. It can mean, I don't like what you just said. It can mean, when we're alone, I'm going to communicate to you in various ways how I didn't like what you just said. Right? That little tap on the elbow. It's their relationship, it's their story, and using their past, that little tap communicates something, and you may notice it in couples sometimes. Sometimes I tap my wife, and I'm like, yeah, going a little too far with the story, but it doesn't mean something later, like I'm going to do something to her as a punishment. But in someone who's physically using their power that way, uh, can be communicating that kind of a threat in that action. Okay, and physical presence isn't enough. Isn't all there is about physical power. Power, I should say, like just intimidating size. You can also have someone who's physically like just their presence is is like magnetic and charismatic and so on and so forth, and that can also lead to an abusive situation. In fact, she says a person with power, with such power, can command a room or an organization or a country, and this person clearly has power to use or to abuse, right? And again, that's just the power of presence. So it's not just the size and stature that intimidates somebody, but it's just their presence as they come into a room. And I think you know people like that. Uh, Most of us probably know people like that. That once they come into the room, they command a presence, and that's power. That's power that can be abused or used in a negative way. Uh, Dr. Langberg, I put a note here for myself. She says we are often less aware of our own physical presence communicates to others. And I don't know that either. Like when I walk into a room, like are people like in my do I even have a physical presence when I walk into a room? And if I do come in to a room, what does and I do have physical presence, what does that presence communicate? The only way to know is to ask. Right, is to ask people like, "Hey, what do you feel when I walk into a room?" And I check with my students sometimes, like, "Hey guys, let me ask you something. When I come in here, ready to teach, ready to start a class. What's it like for you? You know, and as long as I'm getting responses back, like they're comfortable, that's cool, they're chill, relaxed, they feel like they can joke around, that we're in a shared space, a safe space. That's what I'm looking for. If there's ever any kind of like intimidation, fear, uh, then I would try to reset that and see what's going on with me and understand like I shouldn't. I gotta figure out what's going on with my physical presence here. The next kind of power that we have, kind of power, and the sources of power come from God, from this viewpoint of from Christianity, using the Book of Genesis, and the types of power. You have physical power, then we have verbal power, right? So a lot of that is about just how we have the ability to affect each other with the things that we say, specifically with the things we say, and tied into that is emotional power, and that's where we understand people's responses and their emotions and their feelings, and we use our words, the power of our words, to manipulate a response uh, that we desire we look for. Okay? And that's when we get to the abusive situations that we have here. uh, she talks about how dictators use that emotional power manifests differently when a budding dictator, someone desirous of a leadership position, or predator wishes to gain power and control. Right, and so one thing that made me think about, and I know we talk about this often, but it's really important to understand because the presence of these people are out there, right? The presence of predators. Everybody likes to be liked. Okay, it's very rare to find people who don't like to be liked, and even people who say they don't like to be liked, honestly, at some point will recognize when people don't like them and it will bother them, right? So I'm like one of those people that I'm like, oh, I don't care if people like me, but if there is a negative response, right? So I don't go around thinking like, oh, I want to make sure this person likes their interaction with me. I don't go that far. I just want to be myself. But where it can be a problem is if I know someone doesn't like me, it'll bother me. Like, why? What did I do? You know, now, do I take it to the point where like I'm gonna fix it? No, I probably won't do that, right? But ultimately, though, most of us, most of us have a desire to be liked, and that counts for little kids too, and children, and you know anybody really, and anybody who knows that about somebody that they like to be liked, or they want to be liked, or they want to be accepted, can use that, can exploit that emotion with their words for their own purposes, and that's what predators do. You know, we had to talk to our daughter. I mentioned this before, but we talked to our daughter about, you know, being special, about, you know, we know that she's special, that she is our treasure. She is Abba in heaven's treasure. But we've told her, though, that you have to be suspicious of people that don't really know you and want to treat you as special. Okay, they give you a piece of candy and they whisper, like, you know, keep this to yourself, it's between us, you know, like, oh, you're a special kid. The Reason why is because a predator is grooming when they do that. When they know that they found someone who really wants to be liked, who really wants to be thought of as being special, they will use that to manipulate those emotions of wanting to feel that way using their words for their own purposes, right? Their own nefarious purposes, their own abusive purposes, right? To get them to do something that they wouldn't normally want to do. Dr. Langberg tells a story about Kenny Stubblefield, a filmmaker who she got permission to share his story of with in this book. And he is a survivor of clergy sexual abuse and advocate for fellow victims. So he was attending a church and he was taught, about being loved and loved by Jesus and all that kind of stuff. And their parents were loving and supportive. And he was 16 years old when he formed a relationship with a youth pastor. The youth pastor was college aged. So he's 16, youth pastor's college age. You can put it, anywhere between 18 to 24 around there, like being a little loose with that, 18 to 22, a couple extra years to finish your degree. But he was college age, and the pastor would invite the popular boys into his home for sleepovers. Okay. And she wrote here, the reason why I apologize is because I was looking at it. She goes, the pastor was college age and acted in ways that divided friends against each other. Okay. How do you do that? By inviting the popular boys to the home. So using the emotion of knowing, like, especially at 16, you're a teenager, like you really want your sense of identity to be strong with your peers. It's why there's problems when teenagers become teenagers. Their identity and focus of identity and purpose and meaning and who they are shifts from parents to friends, to peers. And so they want their peer. They seek more of the approval of their peers. They want the opinions of their peers. They want to know what their peers feel and think and understand about the world. And if that conflicts with mom and dad, so be it. I'm going to go with my peers. That's just part of natural development. And so if you've got kids who are in that framework now, they want to be accepted by each other. Then you have an adult come in, say like, you're special, you're special, you can come to my house, I like you too, you can come have a sleep over my house, right? It puts a divide into that group because now they're looking at each other, and someone who's even older, they like a little older in college, like, and he's got this authority and power as being a youth pastor or associate youth pastor, they want his acceptance. Okay. And so finally he was chosen. It says Kenny longed to be chosen. He wanted to be accepted. And one day it finally happened. He was invited for a sleepover. Just him and the youth pastor. Now those are all kinds of red flags. Okay. There should be at that church, there should be parents thinking like, this is really inappropriate. It's weird that our sons are being invited to a sleepover at the youth pastor's house on a one-on-one basis, right? This is it's really weird. Like right there, even if it's not the parents, like the leadership at the church should say there's something going on here. But what is he doing? She talks about, after talking about emotional power, she talks about the power of, basically the power of authority, knowledge, intellect, skills. I've talked about that before. How I have that inherently because of the position I have. I'm a professor, and I'm here and I'm talking, I'm teaching, whatever, and so I have that power as well. And so you have this associate power pastor, excuse me. He's got power. He knows how to emotionally manipulate the students, the kids in the youth group. He knows how to use his words to make that emotional manipulation happen, right? And because of his authority position, people aren't questioning him. People aren't questioning. They're like, oh, if Pastor so and so wants to have the kids over for a sleepover, then let him go. He's a pastor, right? We can trust him. Like there's an inherent trust with that position. She talks about that problem, that source of power, and how that's problematic too. The fact that we see people in our society look at others and say this inherently because they have a title, they not only have power, but they have my trust, right? So I saw this doctor, so and so. It's why, I don't know who's a doctor, who's not. Doctor Oz, Doctor Oz, right? I want to say Doc Oz, but I think it's because I'm thinking of Spider Man and Doc Ock. Yeah. So Doctor Oz, Doctor Phil, those are like the two I think of, and then you have the people on the like Judge Judy and Judge Marilyn and Judge Christina and now you got Judge Steve Harvey, right? And you put a title in front of someone's name and put them in a position of authority like a TV, but now we have social media, so that's kind of everywhere, right? Even I'm here on YouTube and Twitch or whatever, and you have a problem then with people in power and authority because there are plenty of people out there who just said like my doctor said this, my pastor said that, my professor said that, and so they just take their word for it. In my classes, and here too, I reiterate like you need to be studying this stuff yourself. Please don't just parrot out what I say without first investigating the information yourself. The book is there, The Redeeming Power, Understanding Authority and Abuse of Church by Diane Langberg. You can read this yourself. We're going to look at some scripture later. You can read that yourself. Please don't, just um, say like he's got the authority or whatever. I'm going to listen to him like that. That puts us in places of danger. And so with this story with Kenny, you can see that's what's going to happen, right? The no one's going to question it because the guy has that power and that authority as being an associate pastor. Now, as that story goes on, he shows him pornography at some point, accidentally flipping through channels. Oh, and gets on a pornographic channel. He's shocked, like, oh shoot, why is this there? And one of the ways that we can use, we have power, is through sex. Okay, sexuality. Just reading from here. I'm sorry I didn't type of this out. Didn't really have the time today, but sexuality is one of the most vulnerable aspects of being human. Vulnerable aspects of being human. It is Sexuality is integrally tied to, I can't say that word for some reason, tied to both identity and intimacy. Okay, and so what a groomer does, they this is a a popular trick, right? I know too many people who have been introduced to the life and style and abuse by a predator through the use of pornography, right? And it's always accidental. It's always like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that was on TV. And with Kenny, he said he just lingered on the channel a little bit. I was like, oh, and then just kind of finally changed. And the reason why it's a problem is because, like it says, it's one of the most vulnerable things about us as being a human being: identity, intimacy, vulnerability. There's a reason why sex is safest in a relationship in which the people that are in it have committed to each other in the long term, right? I don't like to talk about morality, right or wrong, because people just kind of shut you off like, oh, I want to do this. I want to talk about what's safest. And where sex is the safest is when you are in a long-term committed relationship. Preferably a marriage, because in that marriage there is an expectation that you are in this for the long term. Now I know marriage has changed a lot in the US. We're down to like 50% divorce rate in the church and outside of the church. So it's not as safe and long term committed. Like the idea of that isn't as prevalent as today. Right? That's why I say like if you're in a long term committed relationship, that's where sexuality should belong, and the only place it should belong because of how vulnerable we are in sexuality and how closely it is tied to our identity and our intimacy. And when someone exposes it to you at an early age or in a place where you're not ready for it or you can't consent to it, then you're opening up there's an opening up of a pathway towards abuse and using sex in abuse, right? And so that's what he was doing. He was showing the kid the pornography. He's only 16 years old. One of the things that you have to understand about sexuality is that in order to um, have sexuality, it must be engaged with consent. Okay, in order for it to be a mutual and something that we're okay with. Okay, so I'll state it this way: how is sexual abuse defined? Sexual abuse is generally defined as any sexual activity, verbal, visual, or physical, that is engaged without consent. Okay, without consent. So now, who's able to give a consent? A child is unable to give consent, right? And there are a lot of people out there that are trying to argue on the behalf of children having the ability to make that decision. They simply don't. They don't. Their brains have not developed into a place where they can understand the choices that they're making, whether the child is 4, 12, or 16 or 17. Okay, even at the age of 18, where they're legally adults, where the society has put that number at 18, is a question mark. In psychology today, we're understanding the development of the prefrontal cortex, for whatever reason, is slower than it used to be. And so, really, the age of consent should probably be up in the mid 20s, right? Based on the way that today's generations are developing and their ability to make a fully informed decision about what they're doing. That's what we mean by consent. Okay, someone having the ability to understand, okay, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm entering into. I don't want to be impulsive about this. Even if I am impulsive about this, what does this mean for me in the long term? Should I wear protection? That kind of stuff, right? That those kinds of abilities, or the capability to make those kinds of decisions, really isn't forming until much later in life. But right now, that age is 18. Okay. Then you have people who don't have the capacity to choose, even though they are over 18. So, like the elderly who can be sexually abused because they can't even say yes or no. You have those who are in coma in a hospital, so on and so forth. So you have a lot of ways that sexual abuse can happen. And visual sexual abuse is the showing of pornographic materials and so on and so forth to people who again cannot consent, right? And so a 16-year-old legally cannot consent, cannot say yes or no, right? Some states might have some leeway, give away with those rules, and that's a whole other mess to talk about. But in this situation, Kenny cannot consent to seeing pornography. He can't, right? And so, but it's being shown to him, and that's opening him up, his opening up his mind, the way our body works into this world of sexuality. And then he's like, "Oh, I'll sleep on the couch. I'll sleep on the floor." The pastor's like, "No, you got to sleep in my bed with me." That's again where he's using his authority, right? Really strange stuff. When you read the story, like, how could anyone do it? But when you're in that moment, in those moments, you have to think about the power of the other person, what they're doing, and what they're doing, and how they're using their power. He's using his words, his emotions. Oh, I want to fit in. He's using his ability, his authority as a youth pastor. He's using the sexuality aspect of it, making him feel vulnerable. Like by seeing that, you feel vulnerable. You're like, oh wow, I shouldn't have seen that. I just did something wrong, and now you've got a guy here saying like, oh, come sleep over here. Like you got to do what he's doing. He's an authority. You see, it's like all kind of twisted together. It's someone using their power in an extremely negative way, in a manipulative way to hurt someone else. And so he went ahead and he molested Kenny in bed that night. He thought it was wrong. He didn't think it was right. He thought if he told people, they wouldn't be believed, so on and so forth. And then finally, so he went home. Finally, at some point, two of his friends had said like, "Hey, the same thing happened to us." And then that's when Kenny says his nightmare just begun because a youth pastor was angry with his victims for exposing the abuse, right? So they were damaging him and his ministry. The associate was fired, but there was no legal action taken. The police should be called. Everything should be dealt with properly. That guy should go into the legal system and have a trial and hopefully be convicted and be put away and labeled so that at least if he gets out, when he gets out, because I know how the system works, he'll be tried, then released eventually. But if he has a conviction, at least other churches will know not to hire him again, right? But no, these people like they hide it all, they cover it all up. The senior pastor ended the episode with a sentence that would control the next 2 decades of Kenny's life. If you want to be faithful, you will be quiet. And that is the mode of abuse that is used in churches in all throughout the country, all throughout the world, and in different situations. It doesn't always have to be about sexual abuse, right? It could be about a husband beating his wife, or is a drunk and alcoholic and is living a lifestyle that is ungodly and is abusive, like my dad did. So many people are told, okay, listen, if you want to be faithful to God, faithful to the church, faithful to us, you just need to keep it quiet. Okay. And so that's how the abuse of power happens here. And I did skip one just to keep the flow going, but there is one other abusive source of power, and that's economic power, right? And so there are a lot of people who can't leave an abusive situation because they literally don't have the ability, the capability, the money to do that, to get out of a relationship, right? Like if they go, they have nowhere to go, and that's why there's organizations out there that help. There's one in Broward County called Women in Distress. Broward County is a county down here in South Florida. It's called Women in Distress. They have a setup with all the cab companies, and I think they also set this up with Uber now and Lyft, where if a woman needs to get away, they can call these companies and get a free ride. Their address is not listed anywhere, so you can't find where they are. And there's contracts with the taxi companies that make sure that they don't reveal the address, and you just have to tell them I need to go to Women in Distress, and they'll take them. Unfortunately, there's not enough of those kinds of programs out there. It's a great program there in Broward County, which is helpful, but it's especially needed for women who have been in abusive relationships for such a long time. They have no way to get out of it. They have no control over their finances. They're given they're given a what's it called, an allowance that they can use to buy groceries, and they don't save anything up, and they have nothing else to get out. How economic power can be used to control others. In churches is probably a little more straightforward. You see people, the way that they ask for money is important. One time I went to a church, we were visiting, the first time and only time, where the guy literally held up a debit card and while he was praying, and was trying to emphasize the fact that we could give even if we didn't bring cash, we can use a card. And they were passing around this machine that you could swipe and sign and stuff like that. And it just felt like this was the kind of church where they are going to be asking for your money and demanding your money. And because they're a church, because they're authority, power, they're a pastor, they have the Bible and everything else, people will succumb to that power and say, okay, you can have my finances, you can have my money. And some churches go even crazy. I've met with people, their stories are even more intense, where their pastors get involved with their finances directly, see their bank statements, their spending, their tax returns, and everything else to then determine how much they should be giving. And that's a whole other level of economic abuse and power. Now, what I wanted to do was go through this story with Abigail and Nabal, but we're already at almost 40 minutes here on this recording. And so I don't want to go into it as deeply as I thought, but I thought it would be a good way to illustrate how these types of power that we have can be used in an abusive way. Okay. And how we can even read a story in the Bible and see it if we understand and we're looking at it, and then see how some things may even be framed for us to be a positive thing, a character being a positive person. But ultimately, if we take a real look at the definitions of how what power is and how it can be abused, we can see that these characters are in themselves being abusive. So this story here is about Abigail, and her husband Nabal and David. Okay, now, as a way to skip some of the reading and just tell the story. Um, Nabal was a wealthy man. Here in verse 2, you see that he's got 3,000 sheep, 1,000 goats, whatever. But his name was Nabal. And what was known about him was that he was a Calebite, and he was harsh and evil in his dealings. Okay. And so he wasn't a kind person. He wasn't a fair person. He sought to take advantage of people. He was short tempered, all that kind of stuff, right? So not the greatest person, but he's a powerful guy. He's got a lot of economic power, and in that economic power, he's got stature, and so that gives him power. Now, while David is in the wilderness, now this time David is running away from Saul and hiding, where he's been named that he's going to be the next king, and so there's this battle constantly going on, and so David went and was out in the wilderness, and he heard that Nabal was out there shearing his sheep, and David had a relationship with Nabal's men. Right? David had taken care of them before, and he took good care of them. He fed them well and took good care of them. And so what he was looking for here is a return of his in favor of what he had done, right? And so that's what he's expecting in this relationship. Remember, abuse is always about relationships, right? And the stories we tell with each other or with systems, it doesn't matter. I have a relationship with Publix. What's the story I have with Publix? When I used to go, I'd park in a certain aisle, I'd walk in through a certain door, I'd start my path in a certain way, whatever. And all that relationship changed once they finished the renovation. I parked in the same area, but I walked in the store, was completely lost, right? It's all about relationships. And so David is expecting a certain response from Nabal. He asks his men to go to Nabal, greet him, say, hey, we took care of your men, whatever. So in highlighted here, it says, therefore, let the young men find favor in your eyes. So we have come on a festive day. Please give to your servants and your son David whatever you find at hand. So he's basically asking him, hey, take care of us. We took care of your guys. You take care of us. You feed us, house us, whatever we need. Nabal's, so that's what David's expecting in this relationship, in this give and take. His men go and talk to Nabal. Nabal's response there is highlighted. It says, who is David and who is Jesse's son? He knows fully well who David is, but he's using his words, his verbal power, to hit on an emotion, right? An emotion. What's the emotion? David's in a conflict that surrounds his right to be the king, right? Saul is denying that, and David's fighting that, and it's like he's been anointed, Jesse's youngest son, he's been anointed to be the king. He fought Goliath, everything else, like he's got all that, right? And so this phrase is just digging right at the core of who David believes who he is. He is the rightful king. He's the son of Jesse. Everybody knows who I am, right? And he says, "Who is David? Who is Jesse's son?" He's insulting him. He's getting to that emotion. He's like, nowadays there are many slaves running each away from his master. So should I take my bread and my water and meat that I've cooked for my shearers and give it to men whom I don't know where they come from? Now he's just saying, David, you could just be just some regular slave out there. Like you're just a regular guy who ran away from his master. And so in a way, he's actually he's insulting David, and he's using his words to insult David, to hit David in his emotions, and to accuse him even of being just a runaway slave. Like you should submit yourself to Saul. And so now this relationship that David was expecting, right? Like I took care of your men, you take care of mine, not going the way he wants to go. And he responds with anger, with fury, right? He says, David said to his men, everyone buckle on your sword. So now he's gonna ride out and he's gonna go and kill this guy and kill all of his men. Right? Now, one of Nabal's men was like, oh shoot, this David's gonna come, we're gonna have to fight, and he's gonna kill us all. And so he goes to Abigail, who's Nabal's wife, and he tells Abigail what happened. And Abigail was like, oh man, this is a problem. So it says in verse 17, now therefore, no one consider what you will do, for evil is determined against our master and against all his household, but he is such a worthless fellow that no one can speak to him. So she's realizing, like, we're in big trouble here. His big mouth, his abusive ways, which the scripture tells us earlier, he's an abusive, harsh man, has now gotten us all in trouble. We're all in trouble because David's coming and he's going to kill everybody. So what she does is she gets everything ready. She gets all this food ready: 200 loaves, two bottles of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 measures of roasted corn, 100 cakes of raisin, 200 cakes of figs. Got a lot of food ready, and she goes to meet David. Right, so I have this highlighted next. It says, "Surely in vain." She gets off her donkey. I didn't highlight that part. She says to the young man, let's see. Oh no, no, he. This is more of David complaining about how Nabal has treated him. In verse 23, it says, "When Abigail saw David, she quickly dismounted from her donkey, fell before David on her face, and bowed down to the ground. As she fell at his feet, she pleaded, 'On me, only me, my lord, be the punishment. But please let your maidservant speak in your ears and listen to the words of your maidservant.'" Here's what she's doing. She's using her words, and now she's trying to appeal to him emotionally, right? He's charged. He's angry. He feels like he's going to go and kill this guy. And as a response to what Nabal said, Abigail's using her own ability to appeal to emotions. And how does she do that? She gets him to focus on her. She's like, look at me. I'm a woman. I'm innocent. I'm your servant. Okay? Please, she's bowing down. She's begging. She's like, please, let the punishment be on me. She's like, it's my fault. So she's like, my fault. I didn't see the guys that you sent. They went and straight talked to him. He's an idiot. Just like his name says. I'm paraphrasing, but you can see that there in the next verse. Nabal, his name is disgraced. Folly is with him. But I didn't see the young men, so please forgive me. So she's using her power. She has verbal power. She's using emotional power. Now she's doing a good thing here, right? And so Dr. Langberg here is talking about in the book the negative ways these powers can be used, but they can also be used for good. She's using her verbal power and emotional power to try to get David to calm down and to back off of this idea that he's going to go ahead and just kill Nabal and everybody who lives in Nabal's house. It could be like 200 people, right? And um, and so you see there highlights is please forgive the trespass of your maidservant. And so she pretty much appeals, and I'm skipping because of time, but she appeals to David's sense of vengeance and just their cultural senses of that, and how she's like, you're decided to take vengeance on your own, but we know that God would prefer that He's the one to avenge you if needed. And so she appeals to that in verse 31. She goes, then this she says, think about it. You're going to win. You're going to become the king. Adonai, the Lord, is going to exalt you. I need you to think about this. Okay, when that happens, in verse 30 says, when you have been appointed you ruler over Israel, then this will not be a stumbling block for you or an offense of heart to my Lord or needless bloodshed by my Lord avenging himself. So he's saying is when you become king, you don't want to look back on this. You don't want other people to look back on this and say, wow, look at what David did though. He went and killed like all those people. Or for even David to think on it and say, man, why did I do that? That was like too much. Like I'm king. I didn't really need that. Right? So she's appealing to emotionally sense and using sensibility. And I should mention she also used her economic power. She had the they had the money, they had all the resources. I read the list of all the food they had. So she used that power as well. She brought all of that power with her to try to get David to back off and to not kill everybody. And so you see David's response there in verse 33. Blessed be your discernment, and may you be blessed for keeping me this day from shedding blood, from avenging myself with my own hand. Okay. Now the story goes on. Nabal finds out what happened. His heart was merry with him, a drunk, whatever. He woke up when he heard from Abigail, waited to tell him until he was sober what she had done, how she saved his life and everybody's lives. And it says that his heart died within him. He was paralyzed like a stone. So he's like in a coma. You can think of it that way. And then it says that Adonai struck Nabal and he died. So God took care of Nabal and avenged David and his treatment of David because just it's just looking back into how their society was set up and the laws and everything else. Nabal was guilty of sin. David was right to be angry, but he wasn't right to want to kill everybody on his own. And that's where he was going to use his power, his physical power, in the wrong way and go kill everybody. But instead, he backed off. Now, here's where the story ends. I mentioned this earlier, and I found this to be troublesome. Okay. And I know I'm not the only one out there. David sends his men to Abigail once he hears Nabal's died. It says, when David heard Nabal was dead, he said, blessed be Adonai who took the case of my insult from the hand of Nabal, yet has restrained his servant from evil. Adonai has returned Nabal's vileness to his own head. Okay, so God took care of it. I'm good. Here's where David uses his power in a way that is abusive, uh, in my opinion. Then David sent word and proposed to Abigail to take her as his wife. When David's servants come to Abigail at Carmel, they told her, David has sent us to you to take you as his wife. So she rose, bowed down with her face to the ground, and said, behold, your handmaid is a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord. Then Abigail rose quickly and mounted a donkey, with 5 of her maidens following her, following David's messengers, and she became his wife. Listen to this. David also took Ahinoam of Jezreel, and the 2 of them were his wives. So here's where I have a problem, right? We talked about power and sex and consent, right? Does a woman in this situation, does Abigail have the ability to say no? Does she have the capacity to say no? This guy, almost out of his rage and anger, almost killed everybody that belonged to her household. And she probably would have been killed too, right? With his anger and rage. She was able to quell that anger, right? Get him to back off, get him to leave it alone, and God took care of it. Now, this man with this power that she has witnessed firsthand, what it could do, is proposing right? It's funny that it says that he's proposing. But the words of the servant say, David has sent us to you to take you as his wife. What is her response there? Does she have the ability to say no thank you? I don't want to be married. Like my husband just died, literally just died, like I'm good. Does she have the ability to do that? I don't think so. I think she's stuck. She has to say yes or deal with the wrath of David again, right? And so what is her response? Her response is not, okay, yeah, I'll be your wife. It's, I'll be a servant for him. I'll be a servant for him. However he wants to use me, he's going to use me. He's going to use me as a wife, okay, but I'll be a servant that will wash their feet. So she's understanding her position, her place, and how she has no ability to say no here. And so his power is an example. This use of power is an example of sexual abuse because she doesn't want to be married to him. She's agreeing to be a servant, but I can tell you, I'm reading into it, but I can tell you, I'm pretty sure she doesn't want to be married to him. And not only that, she's not the only one. It's not like he thinks she's like special and he loves her and he wants to marry her. He marries someone else too. And so just indicative of what's going on in David's head and how he's using his power in an abusive way, right? And this is a story that's being weaved. This is a story that's being told that if I'm going to be the next king, if I say you're going to be my wife, you're going to be my wife, you're going to say yes. And so again, you imagine what would happen if she said no. I think it would have been a problem for her. And so she's stuck in that sexual abuse because she cannot consent. She doesn't have the capacity to say no. She's old enough to consent, but she doesn't have the ability to consent because if she doesn't, she something bad might happen to her, right? And that's the definition of abuse. So I hope that all makes sense and made sense. And again, the schedule this week, I'm going to really try to stick to it this week. Our daughter started camp last week. There's so many things going on. Thank God the internet worked out okay today, so that's good. Uh, please remember to share with people you think will benefit from this ministry and share the word, spread it, social media, whatever. You can go to YouTube after everything's done. I export it to YouTube in about an hour. It'll be there, and so it's I am Barabbas podcast. You see there above my head, I am Barabbas podcast at YouTube, and you can get the links there and share them on your socials, and we can get some more views out going. Thank you again for watching. Hope everything's going has been going well with all of you, and that your week will be a blessed one.